Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, somebody said it's cold here in Raleigh today. It's all relative, isn't it? God. After the Arctic Circle, anything feels warm. I was in Pittsburgh with a senior executive team off-site starting on Monday, and I flew out here on Wednesday. And I was fortunate enough that one of the officers in the company, his daughter was playing softball, and he said, "Oh, their game has been moved up. I can't get there flying commercially in time." And so one of his business buddies said, "Well, I'll send the plane up there to get you if you pay for the fuel." He said, "Done." So then he turns to me and he says, "You want to get on a private plane and fly to Raleigh?" I said, "Don't ask me twice." So we're leaving. It had been snowing for 3 days in Pittsburgh, right? I mean, just constant snowing. And we start descending into Raleigh, and I see green grass, and I go, "Oh, God, I'm alive again." So thank you. I'm happy. So when someone says they're happy to be here, I'm really happy to be here. What I'm going to talk you through today, what I'm hoping to present to you is a presentation, and some of it includes the survey feedback that folks who took advantage of providing the survey gave to me. I've incorporated that into the presentation as well. So it's kind of a way for you to say, if I'm experiencing this with my C-suite executive team or top executive team, what are other people experiencing and what are they doing differently? So we'll have some of that as well. I'm going to talk through in just a few moments what we're going to accomplish. I'll talk through some of the typical challenges, like what is typical of a C-suite executive team and some of the challenges you face regardless, just because of the unique nature of that kind of team. Then we'll talk a little bit about the kinds of things that most people typically try and do to develop that team. We'll also talk about, on a more personal basis, the kinds of pitfalls and landmines you can potentially step on and how to step around them in terms of how you get positioned to develop very senior executives. Just to kind of expand briefly on what Luann said in terms of my background, compared with David, who you heard over breakfast this morning, I haven't written 23 books and 200 articles. I don't have time. I'm in the trenches, working with, trying to get very senior experienced people to change their behavior, to influence and lead other people more effectively. I do have a blog, if you want to know what it is. The most recent one that I've written has to do with identifying self-defeating behaviors, with blind spots and internal demons. Just if you want to find it, it's pretty easy to find, and just send me an email. I'll give you a direction as well. But I don't write a lot of books. I try and keep, as my senior executives tell me, keep it simple, keep it crisp. So I try and move on. That's what we're going to try and do today. But I am going to start with a story. So the chief human resources officer of a Fortune 500 company called me a couple years ago and said, "I would like you to consider working with our CFO." And I said, "Okay, what's the challenge?" And they said, "The CFO is the likely candidate to become the CEO. Very experienced in the industry, very experienced in the business, but he has some rough edges." Everybody just smiled. This is not the first time you've heard this in your own life, not this story. I said, "What kind of edges are we talking about?" And they said, "Well, he's a little rough with some of his horizontal relationships in terms of the other operating managers. We could probably polish that up a little bit. And he's probably, the CEO says he's not quite ready yet. We're not quite sure what that means. So if we could have an outsider come in and help interpret that, focus on the fewest things that would make the greatest difference. The board really wants him, assuming that the CEO is going to retire in the next 4 to 5 years, the board wants him to be ready when it's time to move on so that this is a simple decision and we have continuity in the leadership." I said, "Great." So it was what we call in executive coaching. By the way, I became an executive coach in 1998 more like 2003. I went out 5 years after I left Amoco because there really wasn't a place for me internally to be a large OD person, organization effectiveness person, in BP. BP and Amoco couldn't have been different cultures. I mean, Amoco had built a very large, very sophisticated HR organization. It had a lot of services, a lot of executive education. It had individualized development plans. And then when we got acquired by BP, and I went over to England and met with my counterpart, and it was like walking 10 years into the past. So I left, and the first thing that a couple of my colleagues said to me when I decided I was being recruited for corporate roles, and there was always something a little squirrely about each one, and They didn't kind of work out. And then Lauren Dalova from Heidrick & Struggles in San Francisco, who was one of their senior people, called me and said, gee, could you help us translate between Lore and the company that we're thinking about acquiring and Heidrick & Struggles, because we got search consultants and people who are kind of psychologists trying to talk to each other, and there seems to be a big gap in between the two. So that's how I got first involved. Because my colleagues had said to me, you ought to get into executive coaching somewhere around 1998. And I said, absolutely not. And they said, why not? You've conducted 300 or 400 senior executive assessments when you were at Hay. You've done this internal process inside of a corporation. You know how a big company works. Why not? Well, in 1998, a couple of people had written a book. Coaching was sexy. And 10,000 people raised their hands and declared they were coaches. And I said, I can't spend my time in the marketplace differentiating myself from people who don't know what they're doing. So I'm going to spend my time doing something else. So it took about 5 or 6 years before I finally got into it. The thing that Lore had an advantage is that compared with the World Federation of Coaching requirements, theirs were even more restrictive. And so only 1 out of 15 people who started the application process with them to be an executive coach passed through that. So fortunately, I got through all of that. I learned a lot. And since then, I've been working largely with, as Luann said, medium to large companies. I get engaged by private equity firms to come in and help their management teams get better results for their investments. I work with individuals in one-offs. I also work as a component to a larger executive development program when we kind of sheep dip everybody in the same program, and then we have an individualized component that has an executive coaching where the coaches know what's in the program and they try and help people move along, starting where that individual is, in more individualized kind of development. I work in a number of those programs as well. So that's kind of what my life is. So that's my reference point as I begin to talk about this. So we got into a shootout, and fortunately I made it through the shootout. Shootout being we present 3 different coaches to the CFO. The CFO talks to him on the phone, figures out who's got the best chemistry, and for some reason he picked me. I usually ask why later, but so for some reason he picked me. And I went down face-to-face because there is a need that we have on a very primitive level for people to see each other eyeball to eyeball. All right? And so there's sort of the human brain, the mammalian brain, and then the reptilian brain. And as George Carlin would say, the reptilian brain, we need to look at each other eye to eye, and one of us needs to answer the question, are you going to eat me? So the basic level of trust that gets developed eyeball to eyeball. So I went down and talked to the CFO, and I talked him through what the process was likely to be and the 360 feedback. And I was going to use both survey as well as interview process. And the reason I do that is on a survey basis, I at least get data that is valid and I can compare it against executive norms. So when somebody says, you know, I walk on water in this level, and I can say, against your colleagues say, against the executive norms, you're up to your waist. I think we've got more work to do here than you think you have for yourself. The problem and the limitations with surveys is that I use them like Doppler radar. It tells me where to look for good behavior, and it tells me where to look for ineffective behavior. But it doesn't tell me with what stakeholders, in what situations, under what circumstances, and what does it look like. That's why I do the interviews. It's much more powerful as a result of that. So I explained the situation to him, and I always ask, what do you expect to get in the feedback? And he said, well, from the CEO, I expect that he's going to kind of hold me off at arm's length. Because it's in his best interest for me to not be ready now. So he'll say, yeah, I'm doing a good job. I do a lot of special projects for him. I help inform him as to what we should be doing differently financially. But he'll say that there's some things that I need to do in developing external relationships and other kinds of things I haven't got. Okay, got it. What about your horizontal relationships? Well, I hold the purse strings for the corporation. So therefore, when we're in meetings or individually or whatever, if I'm not getting the kinds of answers or the numbers don't add up, or I'm highly suspect of how they're putting the pieces of the puzzle together and how they're telling the story about the business, I will poke and push and dig down farther. And sometimes I do that in a way where they're embarrassed about the questions I'm asking, and I can throw a few elbows. Okay, so that's, and I'm thinking to myself, those are some of the rough edges. Let's see where this goes. I said, okay, how about your direct reports and the people who are their reports? His demeanor totally changed. And he said, this is where I get to go out and select the best of the best. I go to the best MBA programs, I go to the best accounting firms, I go to the people who have a strong history of finance, and I get the cream of the crop. And I bring them in here, and I give them growth opportunities, I stretch them, and they get to be so good that we have so many of them, people come and steal our talent away from us. And that, to me, is a good indication that we're really doing great things. So, okay. You're laughing in the back. So what do you think we got in terms of the feedback when I actually collected it? They're running away. The CEO, pretty much what he expected. I mean, kind of it's political, you know. You can't be ready yet because I'm not ready to go. The horizontal relationships was probably a little bit worse than he described it. I mean, the guy could really poke you in the eye, and he could really embarrass you, and it was not necessary. But their recommendation was, why is he doing it after the fact? Why are we playing gotcha? Why wasn't he helping me in the first place get to a good place? Gee, I'd like to have a fundamentally different relationship with the CFO. Then there were the direct reports. And the direct reports, when I started talking to him, they said, well, yeah, he drives us pretty hard. We work hard and we play hard, but mostly we work hard. But on the weekends, it's pretty typical for us when we're trying to get out of the office at 6 or 7 o'clock at night for him to come in and say, I've been asked this question by the CEO. I need whoever you need to get the answer to this by Monday morning, 8 o'clock. Go forth and do it, and I'll see you later, and he'd walk out the door. And suddenly there were 15 or 20 people in the office all weekend long working, and he'd come in on Monday morning, and he'd look at the results without greeting anybody. He'd look at them, he'll say under his breath, I guess this will do, and he'd walk out. So my question was, is that as bad as it gets? And they said, no, he can take people apart when they don't meet his expectations. I said, well, really, how bad does it get? And they said, it's like somebody driving a steamroller down the street and never turning around to see if the roadkill is still twitching. And that stuck with me. That sort of summarized just how bad this guy could be. So I never give the feedback more than a day or a day and a half before I'm going to show up for the face-to-face debriefing. I don't want people to see it the first time when I'm there. I want them to get a little soak time, but not so much that they start running with the data, misinterpreting it, and start doing things with other people. I want them to do it with guidance. So he got his feedback, and the guy is the size of a grizzly bear, and I'm not. Okay, I'm a little stocky guy. And so we were in the board room, and we're sitting down, and I asked him about the CEO. And, yeah, okay, yeah, I understand. And I asked him about his peers, and he said, okay, maybe I was soft-pedaling that. And then when we got to his direct reports, he kind of soft-pedaled it for a little while. And then I said, I purposely put this quote in here because it kind of summarized, it was a common theme from the people that I talked about, is you really can steamroll people without any appreciation for what the impact is. And he turned red, beet red, and he stood up. Now, I need to tell you that on the survey, I had looked at the different influence tactics that he used, and one of the negative influence tactics that he used was called intimidation. Usually, on the scale, everybody is over here in this little tiny space. He was the poster child of the other end of the dimension. And he stood up in this meeting, and he turned beet red, and he looked at me, and he said, these people do not know what they're talking about. And he just escalated and escalated and escalated. And finally, he took a breath, and I'm sitting down at the boardroom, and I go, I think this is what they're talking about. And he stopped. I put together a development plan. We started working on it. We started having coaching sessions every couple of weeks. He worked on the easy stuff. How do I change my relationship with the CEO? How do I make nice with the guys and the gals in operations? But after about 4 or 5 sessions, I pointed out to him, you know, you haven't sunk your teeth into probably the most problematic piece, which is you have not developed the bench strength behind you. If you get advanced to the CEO, these people are dependent upon you. You haven't built a place where it operates without you being present. And he kept saying, I'm going to work on that. Well, we got to 4 or 5 sessions, and finally I said, I'm starting to get worried that you're not coachable. And that's part of my responsibility as a coach. So I'm getting concerned you're not coachable because we're not getting into the really important stuff. So I didn't know what he was going to do with that. I assumed he was going to fire me. And that's one of the things that comes with the turf. The 6th session was done by telephone. We do a lot of this by telephone because of his travel schedule and mine. And it works once you establish some rapport. So he calls it his appointed time. And I say, Gary Myszkowski. And the response I got on the other end was, if I don't change my interpersonal behavior, they're never going to make me CEO of this company. Who are you and what have you done with John? I had no idea what had transpired. So I talked to him about it, and he couldn't identify a precipitating event. But I said, well, how did you get to this place? He said it was like death and dying. So I'm struggling to figure out okay, bring me along. He said, well, first you're in denial, then you're angry, then you're sad. I mean, he went through all the stages. And he says, I finally have to come to terms with the fact that, you want to negotiate and work your way around it. He said, I can't work my way around this. I got to face this, and I don't know how to get there. Can you help me? I'll tell you the end of the story at the end. If I don't, remind me. The point I'm telling you the story is there's several points to this. One is, you need people to if you're going to develop the C-suite, people need to be dissatisfied with where they are. It can't be okay to behave the same old way. Number two, they need to see a clear path towards where they're going. What does better look like? Number three, the development plan was a way of showing them the first steps as to how they get there. His response was, I think I have an idea what good looks like. I finally figured out I should be dissatisfied where I am. I don't even know how to start this journey. The other important piece of this is, I didn't have a clue at one point whether he was going to be coachable or not. And he surprised me. And so when you get people involved in development plans, sometimes, and it took 3 or 4 months before all of a sudden he woke up. You need to be patient with people. I discovered there are people who I think have high potential, who have all the right stuff, all the right competencies, all the right motivative, good education, good pedigree in terms of experiences in industry, and you open the door and ask them to walk through it, and they don't. And you go, come on. It's so easy. Just walk through these 2 doors. On the other hand, I find some people where I go, oh, man, this is going to be such a stretch for them. All I can do is open the doors and the windows, and maybe they can crawl through. I don't know. The probability is going to be 20% or less, and they blossom. And they blossom. And you would have never expected it. I'm having this conversation this week with the CEO as they're looking at some of their plant managers. And there are people who've risen to the occasion once they had an opportunity and some support. We never expected they'd be doing what they're doing. So as we walk through this, I want you to be thinking about some of those elements as you're trying to enable the C-suite and individuals or as a team to develop. These are some of the themes that you'll see in this.